Hello, Will here with Will Folio at willfolio.com. You can log on to the blog if you're watching this on YouTube and check it out. We're just getting started with it, but there's all kinds of cool stuff on there. And you can create an account and participate. So today I wanted to share my recovery story. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but kind of feel like I've always been mentally ill. When I was a child, I was very emotional. I would cry at the drop of a hat. And if anything was unpleasant in my life, I would cry. Except when I was a real young baby, up until I was probably about 2 years old. My mom says I was a very good baby, and I hardly ever cried. But once I got to be about 2, 3 years old, I started crying all the time, and just kind of had a little bit of trouble dealing with stuff. And once I got into like kindergarten, the kids were mean to me, and I had trouble making friends, and it was kind of like that all the way up until middle school. But my mom's Jewish, my dad was Protestant, and when I was about 7, my mom was fed up with the synagogues charging too much money for us to go there and for my brother and I to go to Hebrew school, so she decided to go to my dad's religion and go to church. Well, it wasn't really my dad's religion. It was really my dad's mother's religion, and my dad really wasn't into it. But he decided to kind of humor my mom and go to church, and then he started to like it, and we went often. And I was baptized when I was 8 years old, but it really wasn't a real too pleasant experience at that particular church that we went to, the first church we went to, because, again, the kids were mean to me. And you may have read some of my blog posts. Well, that was the church where they said, "Oh, you're so disgusting. How can God possibly love somebody like you?" And they would just say really horrible things to me, and I'm not sure why that was. It may have been because we were Jewish. It may have just been they just decided not to like me for no reason. I don't know. But going through elementary school, I did have friends off and on, but I really had trouble making friends. And even in middle school, I had trouble making friends. They all noticed that I was very troubled, and when I was 12, I attempted suicide by swallowing a bottle of aspirin. Well, that didn't work out because I don't know of anybody that ever died from taking too much aspirin, but that my parents knew that I was troubled, and I don't know if they couldn't afford for me to go to a psychiatrist, or if they just didn't think of sending me to a psychiatrist, but the school counselor offered interventions in both the 7th and 8th grade. But things really started to pick up when I was in high school. The kids were a lot more mature. A lot of them were already adults. They were seniors, and the high schools that I went to were really good. I went to Palmdale High School, and then I went to Little Rock High School, and I was in the band, and I was in clubs, and the kids were just more mature and not as mean at all. And if I would say anything about my mood, I think maybe I was really depressed in middle school, but I may have been kind of manic in high school. I had a lot of friends in high school, and things were really good. When I got out of high school, I worked for about a year, and then I decided to move to Arizona to go to refrigeration school. And I worked at McDonald's during refrigeration school, and after refrigeration school I got a job as what's called a building engineer, which is basically facilities maintenance. And I did that for about 6 months, and then I just got in a fight with the guy I was living with, moved out, and moved back to California. And that's when things started going downhill. I got another job, which was very hard to find, and it was very far away. I was driving all over Southern California. And I wasn't performing very well either. And that's when my mom, because my father was mentally ill towards the end of his life, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and my mom kind of had some insight to it, and she told me to start going to a psychiatrist. So I went to a psychiatrist, and he diagnosed me as being bipolar, and I ended up quitting my job and applying for disability, and I got it a year later because I had gotten to a depression that was probably about a 9 or a 10 in factor, and I was so depressed that I would just stay in bed for days at a time and not get out of bed at all, not even to eat or drink anything. And I would even soil myself in my bed. I wouldn't even get up to go to the bathroom. So this was California. They did a 5150 and sent me to the hospital in Sylmar. I lived in Lancaster at the time. And they even gave me vitamin shots in the hospital. I guess I was malnourished. And I was about 300 pounds from all the medications I took. And spent 2 weeks in the hospital, got out, felt a lot better, enrolled in school and college because I didn't want to do air conditioning anymore, so I decided to study computer graphics. I thought that was interesting. And I also had wanted to become Catholic for some time. Probably even when I was living in Phoenix, I started going to a Catholic church for a little bit, then I moved back to California and kind of stopped going. But I started being serious about going through RCIA. I went to an inquiry class and then started the actual initiation. So in 2001, I went through RCIA and went through computer graphics school. And at the time I was taking lithium, Escalith, which is a time-release lithium, Zyprexa, and Topamax. Topamax was to counteract the side effects from the Zyprexa. I ended up going to Weight Watchers too, and so all those things came to fruition. I became Catholic. I finished my courses at the college. Oh, I almost finished them. I think I had like one more semester to go. But I lost 90 pounds with Weight Watchers. 90 or 100? I think I lost 100 pounds with Weight Watchers. And my doctor said, "You're stable. I can take you off of the Zyprexa because you're bipolar, you're not schizophrenic. And as long as your mood stays stable, you won't be psychotic." Well, shortly after I went off the Zyprexa, I kept taking the lithium and the Topamax. He kept me on the Topamax. I started to become psychotic and things started happening. I didn't finish college. I decided to do something else instead for whatever reason. I decided to go to CNA school and become a nurse, non-medical nurse. And then that following winter, it was around February of 2003. See, in 2001, I started doing all that stuff, school, Weight Watchers, RCIA. In 2002 was when I went off the Zyprexa around that summer. Well, the winter of 2003, I had told my mom to put me in a boarding care home, which is like a supervisory care home is what they call it in Arizona. And shortly after I entered that home, I had an episode where they had to take me to the hospital. And I had started journaling at that time. And when you journal, when you're psychotic, you write things down, and it makes sense to you at the time. But as you go back and read it, it kind of, if you're still psychotic, it might mean something different every time you read it. But as I recovered when I went to the hospital, I still continued to journal. But the stuff I was writing before stopped making sense. And my delusions, I had this delusion that I was a prophet and that God was sending me messages through printed material. I would look at words and associate them with things, or try to, decode it like it was some kind of code. Well, as I became stable on my new medication that I got from being in the hospital, all that stuff started to go away, and I actually felt, I felt more in touch with reality, but I felt kind of bad that I wasn't a prophet and that my relationship with God was affected by it. But I still went to Mass. I was going to daily Mass. This was in 2003. I moved in with my mom, moved out of the boarding care home, moved in with my mom, stayed there for a little while, moved in with a roommate, but found that I really couldn't afford that on what I was getting on disability, so I moved back in with my mom and just paid her what I could afford, and started going to Mass every day just to have something to do, because I was looking for work. I felt recovered enough to go to work, but I lived in a very economically depressed area, and work was just impossible to find. And this was starting in 2004. I started going to Mass daily, and for over 2 years I went to Mass every single day. Only missed a couple of times because I was sick. But Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday I went to Mass. And I even served in the Mass. I was an altar server in the daily Mass, and I was a sacristan in the Sunday Mass. And it was really kind of a good experience. I kind of hung out with monastics and went through other ministries with them and conversed with them and communed with them. And things started really looking up. I read the Bible all the way through, read the Catechism. But for some reason, the Bible stopped making sense. At the time, I was just on Risperdal Consta on a lower dose, and the Bible stopped making sense. I stopped believing in Jesus, and moved to Phoenix and found a job. Well, for a year, I wasn't on any meds because I couldn't find a psychiatrist that took my insurance. And so that was in 2007. In 2008, March of 2008, I ended up in the hospital again. Fortunately, my job was very understanding of it, and I was able to keep my job. But that's when I got in cahoots with something called the Regional Behavioral Health Authority in Arizona, particularly in Maricopa County, Arizona, Phoenix. And so that's when I got in cahoots with one of their clinics, and I went back on the Risperdal Consta. But that wasn't really working out. Was taking lithium, and I didn't really have a very good doctor at that time to kind of get me stabilized. She thought I was stable at one time, and I really wasn't, because I had been off my meds for a year. So they thought since I worked that meant I was stable. Well, it doesn't. People who are mentally ill can work. Just because they're mentally ill doesn't mean they can't work, but just because they're working doesn't necessarily mean they're stable. So I ended up in the hospital again in May of that year, and again in September. And then I was living in Chandler, Arizona at the time. I ended up moving back to Glendale. I found this room to rent from this little old lady. She was really sweet. She was a metaphysician. And I rented a room from her for 18 months. When the economy thing happened in 2009, they pulled a lot of funding from the REBA, and so people that didn't have access didn't qualify for services anymore. So at that time I was on a certain medication which my insurance covered, but I had Medicare and only got a couple $1,000s worth of coverage. So I found a new psychiatrist who dealt with SMI, and that new psychiatrist put me back on risperidone tablets, and I took those for quite a while with lithium, and I did pretty okay. I ended up moving into my own apartment for about 18 months, and then I ended up buying a house. Well, buying that house was really, really stressful, and I became psychotic once again, and would go to this psychiatrist and tell him about it, and he'd make adjustments to my medications. But I had another prophetic religious experience while I was living in the apartment. This was before this is what put me back on lithium. I got really manic and had a religious experience. That's what caused me to come back to the church in 2010. I had another religious experience in 2012, which gave me a revelation about the nature of God's Word, which I talk about sometimes on my blog. But it's kind of debilitating to be that way. And but when I was having those religious experiences, that's when I started doing YouTube and going back and looking at my videos and seeing what kind of sense they make. It really does help me to express my thoughts and then come back to them when I'm in a different frame of mind to see what I was really thinking. And when I was doing my journaling, a lot of that stuff was really crazy. It didn't make any sense at all. And I think that if you ever see any of my videos, if I'm ever not making any sense, it really is because I'm psychotic. And if I become psychotic, that doesn't necessarily mean I've fallen out of recovery. It just means that I'm going through challenges. That's just a part of being mentally ill. I used to have a friend named Nina who said, when you're mentally ill, sometimes you're going to get sick. And when that happens, you go to the hospital, you get better, and then you go back to what you were doing. And it really is kind of like that, except nowadays you can't just go to the hospital. They won't take you unless you're suicidal or homicidal, or unless the cops bring you in or something like that. So, but fortunately, I can get in to see my doctor fairly quickly. I mean, the last time I needed to get in to see my doctor, it was basically 2 weeks out. But it used to be like a month out or more than that. So my doctor is more accessible these days. So if I am having issues, I can just come in to see the doctor and tell her what's going on with me, and she can help straighten things out. I ended up quitting my job in 2013. The job was just too stressful. I went to the hospital because I was sleepwalking, and the doctor in the hospital didn't want to do much with my meds. He thought I was just exhausted, and I was exhausted. I ended up quitting my job, and about 5 months later, after working a couple of other temporary jobs, I got hired where I'm at now as a peer support specialist, and I've been at that job ever since. But like I said, I still have challenges, and so I journal. I do the vlog or the video log and the blog. It really helps me to write out my thoughts and to go back and read them myself and see where I was at before and see where I'm at now. So that's where I'm at, and it took about 20 minutes. That's pretty good. So check out the blog, willfolio.com, and I'll see you there. God bless you.